Good morning. Welcome to the Housing Digital Micro Conference, looking at how data can be harnessed to improve the resident experience. My name's Joe Brune. I'm the Managing Director of Housing Digital, and I'm today's host and chair of this online event, where we discover how data-driven insights can transform the way social housing providers understand and meet resident needs. We'll discuss innovative approaches to collecting and analysing data from tenant feedback to service usage patterns and how this information can drive improvements in maintenance, communication, and community engagement. We'll discover how leveraging data can create a more responsive and resident-focused approach in social housing, particularly pertinent since the recent government announcement of a resident experience fund of £1 million to be allocated for projects. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Will Walker, Director of Transformation at Citizen.
Hi, Joe. Thanks very much. So just to run through my slides, it's quite, I was asked to talk about some sort of more tangible examples of where you can use data within services. So I think it works quite nicely with the speakers that we've already had. Just to touch on what Citizen is, where we are, used to be known as WM Housing, but we operate across the West Midlands. We're about 32,000 units, something like that. We've got quite concentrated high-rise type urban stock in Coventry and Birmingham, and we've got some quite rural stock across Herefordshire and Worcestershire. So we're quite diverse in that sense. I've been with the organisation for about 6 years now. So one of my first jobs when I arrived, and I think it was about late 2018, was to amalgamate the different previous parts of the organisation into one and form Citizen Housing. So we did that, and then we've been on a journey since then to modernise services, data being a key part of the modernisation that we've been working on. So we amalgamated those different providers, rebranded to Citizen, and then started a sort of major change programme, which had initially not so much a focus on data actually, but then increasingly data over the years. So when I arrived, issues that we had, as a lot of organisations do, that have arisen as a result of numerous mergers. I know that goes on a lot in the sector, and we sort of faced similar challenges, different processes, and kind of being seen as different parts of the organisation still. So there was a real cultural element to the programme. So we had enabled teams that worked quite differently between different parts of the organisation. Same with compliance, same with repairs. There'd been a legacy change programme called Journey to Excellence, it was called, which had kind of failed a few years previously. So change was seen as a bit of a problem and a difficulty. Data quality wasn't so much of a focus at that time, and we did have quite low customer satisfaction. And some of the other speakers have said you need to work with colleagues as well and address some of the frustrations that they have with services. So diverse system sets, diverse processes didn't lead to happy staff or happy customers. So we set about setting out our purpose as an organisation. Home is our foundation for life, and a set of values around that. And we worked with teams to buy them in essentially into those values, with a set of behaviours behind them as well, and started to break down the silos that we had across the organisation. We established the change programme, which that's the sort of vision for the change, which is to put our citizens first, working as one team, delivering great services. So customers are able to access services that are easy to use, and they can choose. They've got a better choice about how they want to do that, how they want to transact with us. We've got colleagues working as a mutually supportive team, because we had different teams within teams and also different teams working alongside each other, all working in silos, but really focusing on value add for the customers. And then when those two things came together, we saw that teams would work together to ensure that great customer experience, which I think in the years since has started to come to fruition, really. I don't know if any of you guys are from Shropshire, which is where I'm based, but that's a pub that's kind of halfway between Bridgnorth and Shrewsbury. And a few weeks at one point in the programme, sort of early days, I booked a table in the Riverside Inn. Did it on Saturday night before we went out the next day with the family. Booked the table online, just quickly did it on an app. That was a nice experience. Went out for the morning the next day, and intended to go to the pub on the way back. And things went a bit awry with the family, and we got very wet and muddy and all the rest of it. So we decided to cancel the table. So I rang up and I thought, well, I'm probably going to have to deal with a bit of an irksome member of staff, cancelling at short notice. So I rang up to cancel the table. I said what it was about, just gave the booking the name that I booked in at the time. They found the booking quite quickly and easily, and they cancelled it without a problem. And it was only when I hung up that I kind of I thought, actually, was that a human? and actually it wasn't. It was a bot that I was talking to. But the experience that I'd had would be, it was far better probably than it would have been with somebody who was, busy trying to prepare for service, kind of a bit irksome that somebody's cancelling at late notice. And also the staff in the restaurant on the back of that transaction are just going to get a nice dashboard of where they're getting tables, where they're not getting tables, taking a lot of the pain out of the process. So I just thought that's really the kind of service on simple transactions we should be able to give to our tenants, our customers. That they should expect that. It shouldn't be out of the question and a difficult thing to achieve. But when you work in housing, there's so many different aspects of service you're trying to deliver. It's very difficult to get to those simple things. I think Steve referred to it as brilliant at the basics, and that's a strapline we did use at one point. Be brilliant at the basics, get those simple transactions sorted out for customers so they can deal with this seamlessly and easily on the volume transactions that they want to complete. So when we set about it, we didn't just look at data. It was part of the effort, and probably a small part, if I'm honest, at the beginning of the program. So we focused primarily on people by looking at values, behaviours. Then we got into process redesigns, and we initiated a lot of work about technology. And we also then a bit later on did start to look at data in its own right. So in terms of the simple stuff that we did, so simple transactions like rent balance or booking a simple repair, we simplified and mapped all of those diagnostics that we're using and got the humans that are doing it now to do that consistently. So really simple, really straightforward. We introduced customer tenants checks, which post-COVID had fallen by the wayside. So we used those, though, to correct and collect customer data and also some elements of asset data like property size, whether they're missing or bedroom numbers, that kind of stuff. We also set about on a technology front, upgrading our housing management system. So I would say, rather than focusing on data in its own right, you need to have a cross-cutting look at those four elements: technology, data, people, and process. And they became our foundational activities, which we then started building towards that beautiful pub that I referred to earlier. So the next stage of the program, then data did become more of an issue, and we had some focused phases of the program working on data, improving customer and assets data. And we used a series of tests to triangulate where customer data was incorrect or assets data was incorrect, and do quite a lot of cleansing work. We replaced our contact center technology at that point. We initiated a big program to do that and come up with an omni-channel solution, which is now in place to sit alongside our upgraded housing management solution as well. So the technology in the background was being built and consolidated so that it worked properly, and we could then go to the next level with our housing services, which we were again redesigning. Some of the things we talked about have been talked about. Obvious candidates, complaints, repairs were sort of front of the queue, really. Continued cleansing and integrating key data into processes. So I think one of the other speakers said use processes to collect data, but processes can also benefit from the data that you have. So there's a kind of double-handed thing there to add value in processes. And then try to build understanding across teams, because I think the more you bring people with you on data, you need them to populate your data and systems cleanly and correctly, and you need them to want to do that, really. So I think by seeing some of the processes and the systems and the direction of travel and all of the effort that we made communications wise and getting out to teams to talk to them, involving them in process redesigns, that meant it gradually built that understanding across the organisation. So that was a real positive as well. So just in terms of what that means now, what services we're able to now deliver. So a customer contacting us now, traditionally they would have used a landline phone. It would have meant that the customer would have to repeatedly identify themselves, give their name, address, and so on, talk through the issues that they've had previously. Nowadays, we have got telephone as our primary channel still. We've also got chatbot, which we've now established as a sort of major channel. We've got a customer portal, which is a lot stronger than it's ever been. And so when a customer comes into us, taking the telephone as an example, there's an auto identification using the customer data that we hold that's clean and correct, so that we immediately identify that customer. There's a screen pop through to the call handler with the most recent transactions offered up to them. That's if they get through to a human, but there are some transactions we're able to deal with now, particularly in chatbot and increasingly in voice, where simple things like rent balance, maybe next repair due, the date of the next repair that you've got, we're able to provide to the customer without talking to a human. So going back to my experience of cancelling a table in a restaurant, that's probably what people just want to know: what's my rent balance, and they're able to hear that through the voice bot. Or if they've got more intensive or complicated matters to deal with, they can come through to a human, and that is supported. By doing that, we've managed to create time and space for core advisors to deal with service requests. And the other benefits of some of the tech stuff that we've put into processes and the correction to processes, the system can auto record. As this meeting's being auto recorded and summarised, that is now happening in our contact centre, and we're able to auto summarise that transcript as well, down to a short snapshot that we can copy and paste into the CRM and keep that accurate record. On the point about customer experience as well, and monitoring customer experience, we were able to use those transcripts and the call dialogue that goes on to give a really thorough check, a semantic kind of check on the quality of that experience. So we get a much more granular and better understanding of how good our services actually are. So that's inbound. Outbound customer services, we've started to work quite heavily on a number of different areas, really. So going back to the traditional model, we post, there's a huge amount of post that used to go out and still does to some degree in services we haven't worked through. So generally on appointments issued, I think Ian talked about this early on in terms of no access. So an appointment's written, we write to a customer about an appointment that we're going to tell them that's when we're going to visit. We don't, surprisingly, they don't write back to us. They just aren't in. And so you put a card on the door and you create a doom loop of no access. What we're doing now is we're using outbound campaigns to prompt customers and allow them to then correct or change appointments if to suit themselves. So we do an outbound campaign. We can do that through a voice call, or we can do that through an email or other message as well. Checking out with the customer, is that appointment convenient? If it's not, they can amend that live, and then we can then appoint it and hopefully get access. So it kind of tackles one of those segments that we spoke of earlier, and means that we get access, and that's had quite a good impact on our access rate so far. We're looking at tenancy management checks. We're looking at compliance, and it also records that compliance effort, and we're looking at repairs as well. So it's really positive and much better experience for customers. In terms of follow-ons, so in that, and I mean where we've this example that I'm using is damp and mold. So traditionally we would have gone out and done a damp and mold treatment, so a wash down or some kind of intervention like a fan. We would have written to customers to ask if they had been successful. We probably wouldn't have got a response. There'd be no record of what would happen, and that would likely come back as a new repair for damp and mold. What we're doing now is that we've got an outbound campaign set up so that when we do a damp and mold complete a repair, the message goes out to a customer about 6 weeks after the fact and asks if that repair was successful. The customer's there able to confirm that it was successful and they're happy with the procedure, or press no. In the case of it being yes, then the record is retained for our purposes and make sure that we're keeping that customer in good state. If it's not, then it comes back, gets escalated, and we look at the next intervention, possibly escalating it to a surveyor if necessary, to try and do a bit more of a deep dive into what the actual root cause of the issue was. So hopefully that's useful. It picks up on quite a number of the themes that came out of the previous speakers. But yeah, quite happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Will. We have got a question in the chat, which I'll come to first, from Jane. What HMS system and omni-channel software did you implement, please?
Yeah, so we've got ActiveH, so the web version of their latest solution, as was MIS. And in terms of omni-channel, we're using Amazon Connect. So it provides, and I would say really we're kind of at the foothills of the journey, really, because we've started to use some of these services, started to leverage data, but there's a lot more to do on the data, on the processes, and leveraging those systems that we can go at now. So it kind of opens the door to a whole world of new technologies that we can use to support our process redesigns. And if we do a lot of the work that was talked about, I think Steve talked quite a lot about customer journeys and addressing pain points. We've got a lot more tools in the box as a result of those solutions to be able to address the pain points that customers have, creating that decent customer experience that we're all after.
Excellent, thank you. A follow-up question from Joe Nicholson. How has the core automation impacted tenant satisfaction?
So it's fairly early days, but we're definitely seeing an uptick in both our TSMs and in the contact center measurement that we're doing. So it's quite a positive experience, I think, really. I think that breaking that down into kind of simple transactions and edging your way into it is the way to go, rather than I think, because chatbots, voice bots don't have the best reputation necessarily. But I think that often comes from companies trying to essentially outsource their contact center offer to a chatbot, which I don't think anybody in housing would want to do. But by edging into some of the simpler transactions, you can take the pressure off the contact center team to allow them then to create better customer experience for customers, focusing on those more complicated tasks. So that's the kind of approach that we've taken. Our board's really not keen on taking away our telephony offer, and we've got a pretty decent answer rate. Our average call waiting times are in the single digits. So it's a really positive experience, hopefully, for customers. And that's what we all want to offer, isn't it? Is a decent digital offer that ticks the boxes and does the right things for customers, backed up by an in-person human interaction where you need it, backed up by a frontline member of staff who's able to visit the customer for things where they need to visit the customer and add value. I think both staff and customers appreciate that. So it's quite a good model, I think, really.
Indeed. And to follow up, I think Alistair's question follows up quite nicely. Have you seen from the outbound campaigns that demand has increased initially as unmet demand becomes better identified? If so, is this still a net positive in terms of earlier root cause resolution?
Well, on the damp and mold experience that I just outlined, we wouldn't stand for the fact that we didn't get a response back from a customer. So our response was we send somebody out again. So because we need to get an understanding of whether that damp and mold, the industry where it is, what we need to do with customers, we need to keep people safe. So in effect, we were over-resourcing the follow-up appointment with a very expensive resource. So that outbound campaign has actually reduced demand on that service and sort of, again, given them a bit of capacity to focus on the cases where there is a problem. And in the majority of cases, that has actually been successful. So.
And then a question from Rob Mottram over at Social Telecom. Was Amazon Connect complex to set up and maintain?
I wouldn't say it's been simple, but Incline, who are our partner, our developer partner, is that they've been really good. It's been a positive experience. They've got experience with other clients around the sector, and so they've kind of helped us. They've been challenging at times, but they've held us to account on delivery. And we've took quite a lot of time to define our requirements in a lot of detail. So we had a kind of substantial library of what we were aiming for, did a lot of soft market testing, and I think went into that project or that program with our eyes wide open, really. So by doing that, you kind of prepare the ground. I say, transformation or change of this nature is not a quick thing. It's taken us, I've been with the organisation for 6 years, and for that entire time we've been driving towards this kind of model. So I think the experiences as we built through those years allowed us to get to that point, and I think the people aspect of that is a big part of it. And I don't think, as a sector, we're brilliant at being really joined up, because in an omni-channel offer, you need to have all of the different departments and all the different service areas able to respond and understand where you're trying to go with an omni-channel solution. So you can join up your CEC offer with the downstream service areas, and then work as a whole to provide that customer experience. So I think we used the requirements phase and took a long time about that to make sure that we captured all of the different departments' needs and wants from the project, and then we went to procurement, and then we worked with the supplier to deliver those. So we built quite a trusting relationship over that time. This has been going on for about 2.5 years, that particular project, and we've got to a point now where we've implemented the chatbot, implemented telephony, implementing outbound campaigns. So it's really bearing fruit now.
I think you've partly answered this question, but I'll ask it just in case. From Jasmine Dudgeon, throughout the changes, were customers involved, and how did you find recruiting customers to help shape the changes and improvements?
Absolutely. I am challenged by my boss, the COO, on a daily basis about making sure the customers are fully engaged, but that's absolutely what we want to do. So we've got a reasonably sizable customer engagement team who help us in that regard. We have a lot of workshops, do customer journey mapping, understand their current experience and their wants and musts, similar to the board that we were looking at earlier. We don't have the benefit of that software, but we probably are in the PowerPoint and other tools basket to deliver that. But we also built a digital panel, so we've got about 300, I think it is up to now, 300-400 customers who are involved in a digital panel, and we find that a really good way to test it, particularly digital services, and you get access quite quickly, and you can take customers through a digital journey on a service and test and train and correct it kind of live. So it feels much more like a modern, way of developing services rather than having, in history we've had quite a lot of sort of, in-person meetups, and you get a certain demographic of customers. So by using a digital panel, we get quite a different set of customers involved, which is really helpful.
And then Daniel Oliver, timelines always scare people. What kind of timeline did you have, and what kind of conversations were had to make sure the analysis was done up front and appropriate time given to it?
Yeah, so we did a business case, and we had actually 2025 was our first sort of final year for the vision for the program, and we're now going through another phase of rescoping the program, because I think in reality it's difficult for people to sort of see over a 10-year horizon. But I'd say to go from where we were to a really truly modern, cutting edge kind of customer experience organisation, that's the kind of timescale you're looking for. So we took quite a lot of time trying to keep the exec team. They've been really supportive, and they knew what they wanted long term and recognised that it was going to take some time to do that. But it's quite a difficult one, because people want results quickly, and people talk about the classic quick wins, which was some of the things that we used in those, the simple scripts that we redesigned, simple steps forward, keep it as simple as possible, and show value as you go, was kind of the way that we went. But yeah, we had a 2025 vision, and that's where that initial program vision came from. Now we're re-baselining the program, recreating our business case for what we now know, with all of that work in hindsight, and the tools and the experience really has allowed us to be even more visionary about it. So we're going further over the next sort of few years really. So we're just casting that at the moment.
And then I'll come to Mark next, who's got a hand raised.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's Mark Cantrell, editor of Housing Digital. I was just listening earlier when you were saying how data wasn't at the forefront when you began this process, and it struck me as kind of like echoing what Steve had said, how they kept tech out at the beginning. I mean, do you think that perhaps sometimes we dive in as a sector straight to the tech and the data first before really knowing what we're going to do with it? I mean, is that part of what the process was for you? Let's figure out what we're going to do first, and then see how the data and tech can help. Was it kind of like that?
Yeah, I think because we needed to understand really where the pain points were for customers and staff in a lot of detail up front, before we could then tackle what became an emerging theme, that data was a problem within those service delivery strands. So a customer would come to a particular process and have to fill in their details again, rather than having a really accurate core set of customer data that you can put into the process, and you handhold them through the process and make it a lot smoother by doing so. But yeah, I think data as a sort of science is relatively new to us. I think technology has got a bit of a longer history to it, and we recognise the need for technology and so on. But data is a relatively new thing out there in the world. So 4 or 5 years ago, it probably wasn't as front of mind as it is now. And a lot of the talk, I think, at the Housing Summit and through these sort of conferences and so on, is bringing a lot of energy and focus onto kind of AI and data, and the need to have that as a real key part of your program.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for your question, Mark. Question on the chat from Stuart Braddon. What were the main takeaways from your HMS migration and legacy data?
Wow. On the HMS migration, I think don't underestimate the amount of effort that's going to take. Fortunately, ours wasn't a replacement. It was an upgrade, essentially, a migration to a newer version. But that meant that we needed to redocument and replace a lot of our workflow. And the way that they were all coded was kind of lost in the annals of time. I mentioned that previous change program, Journey to Excellence, which had kind of created a lot of those processes. So they needed to be reviewed, remapped, sorted out, and it did put a lot of pressure on the technology and process teams to try and do that at pace and show movement on it really. So I think that's the one on the migration. On data, I think an early mistake that we made was thinking that asset data was a simpler thing to do. So we started with asset data. And as we now know, there's a huge sort of depth to asset data and a huge diversity, because you've got numerous different teams, compliance, repairs, and assets, all kind of wanting similar data sets, but actually the composite of those teams is quite a deep data set. So that's quite an extensive thing to collect, really. So I'd say, and customer was actually, we found, relatively easier, but it's still quite a complicated thing to do. So we spent a lot of time working with operational teams, working with processes, and understanding what that customer data set needed to look like. We started from the core returns, the regulatory returns that we make, and supplemented that data set with other things that we needed. And that was we found quite a good way to move forward the customer data set stuff. But we're still working on asset data, and we've refreshed a lot of it. But those data silos and working between compliance, assets particularly, and then understanding what repairs need, because they kind of need different levels of data. Repairs need component level data to understand what might be a good component versus a less robust component. That's a key aspect. Or walking into the property and knowing what component they're likely to have to replace and be able to take that with them on their van stocks. It's quite a low level of data needed. Whereas planned works might need, general condition about a kitchen or condition about windows and so on. So getting that right is a challenge for us still, but we're working on it.
Interesting stuff. I just wonder, from my perspective, quite a little bit of a question around kind of digital engagement and how many residents are digitally enabled in order to see some of this transformation take place. And I imagine for some residents who still aren't online, how much of a challenge that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and having backup channels so that the digitally excluded are still able to access services. I think in our experience, it's one of the things that we collected through the tenancy management check process, and we've actually got quite high levels of digital engagement. I think there's quite a lot of misinformation about it, because you talk to a customer about, do you have broadband, might be the question, and they don't have broadband, but they have a smartphone that they're able to use data to access services on. And so we found that getting that questioning right is quite an important way to unlock actually what their ability to access the digital world is. So I think I was reading something yesterday, and it was a sample of 1,000 customers, and I think the digital engagement rates were a lot higher than you would think they would be. So I think possibly that's part of the problem, really, is trying to ask the questions in the right way and make sure that you're promoting actions. We've also got a digital engagement team that reach out, and on the back of TMC checks, they're able to provide data cards and try to promote access and reasonable cost and so on. So trying to encourage it that way as well.
Good stuff. Okay. Just to summarize what we've heard today, we heard from Ian at Crimson, who is the Chief Data Officer, and he got the ball rolling by explaining what we actually mean by data. Time and technology has moved on, so it's not just structured data in the columns and rows of Excel spreadsheets. Nowadays, it can include text, audio, geospatial information, and more. In a nutshell, data is any information an organization gathers and stores. As he explained, increasingly the sector is working to collate this data into one platform to provide a single version of the truth. He explained how this becomes a powerful means to analyze the business and target benefits for stakeholders. As he pointed out, data quality is vital, as is security and governance. We then had Steve Allcock, who's the Group Business Transformation Director at Riverside, who presented a real-life case study to explain how they are using data to reform its services. Brilliant at the basics, not just about innovation for innovation's sake. He explained, but also delivering a consistent and emphatic approach based around residents and informed by quality data. The approach is about building services based on real experience and expectation, not assumptions. It's a systematic approach that is based on resident needs rather than those of the organisation. We've then just had Will Walker, Director of Transformation at Citizen, who explained the process and reasoning Citizen applied to modernise its services and integrate its systems and teams following the merger. The journey didn't begin with data, but it became a much more important factor as they moved forward. The approach was founded on a set of values and purposes. Then when Will went on to focus on 4 key elements: technology, people, processes, and culture, with data coming to the fore as the journey progressed. The purpose is to place residents at the forefront of the business and enable teams to work together to provide the experience residents expected. And then finally, just wanted to say thank you to Crimson, who are one of our stakeholder partners, and for sponsoring today's micro conference. And also just a reminder of Crimson's conference taking place on the 13th of November, and the link to that is in the chat. Other than that, it's big thank you to today's presenters. Thank you to all that attended, and we hope to see you at a future Housing Digital Micro Conference. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.